Joining us right now to talk about all the latest in the virus developments is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He is the former FDA commissioner. He's also a CNBC contributor, and he serves on the boards of both Pfizer and Illumina. And Dr. Gottlieb, I want to ask you about your own op-ed that you have in the Wall Street Journal this morning as well. It's titled, How to Keep Workers Healthy on the Job. There are some serious steps that you lay out to say, here's how this will work in the new world. What's step number one?
Right, and the idea here is really for businesses to start thinking about what their back-to-work plans are and what they can do to try to create a safe workplace. So looking at things like trying to provide alternative transportation to mass transit. A lot of people are forced to use mass transit, but we know mass transit systems have been a source of spread, notwithstanding the fact that municipalities are cleaning them more. Shared surfaces on buses and subways have been a source of spread in cities like Chicago and Boston and New York. Trying to create a safe environment inside the workplace, access to testing for people who have very mild symptoms who might not present to a doctor, liberal cleaning of shared surfaces. One of the things we recommend is that if you have a cafeteria, continue to operate it, but operate under safe circumstances. You're better off offering food inside the workplace than watching people go out to a corner deli where they might come in contact with more people and it's harder to social distance. And so we lay out a number of measures that businesses should be thinking about on how to create a safe work environment. And I think all businesses need to start doing this now. They also need to start planning for what they're going to do when there are positive cases in the workplace, because there will be positive cases. So you need to have plans in place for how they deal with that, how they do contact tracing in the workplace and get people access to testing.
You know, a lot of workplaces are dealing with that question right now. If they're operating, if they're emergency services, they're trying to make sure that there are not common areas. They're trying to limit the number of employees who are there. And it makes sense to try and maybe circulate through some different employees so people don't get too burned out or too stressed out on issues. But then you also raise the issue of, by doing that, making sure you are bringing more people into the workspace. What's the right plan for that? Should there be go teams? Should there be different locations for those teams? How should it work?
Well, businesses need to think about that. Some of these things are easier for office workers than people who work on a shop floor in a commercial environment. If in an office you can split your employees, have half of them work at home, half of them come into the office on alternating days. You should continue to encourage telework where you can. You can even use things like Zoom calls inside the office rather than convening large meetings. Have people, have meetings virtually inside the office environment. On a shop floor, things are a little bit more difficult. It's harder to naturally social distance. So you want to think about PPE, personal protective equipment on a shop floor. Let people wear masks if they want to. People need break rooms. They need to come off a shop floor and go into a break room. But you might want to have more breaks over the course of the day and stagger them more regularly so that smaller groups can take breaks so you don't have as much congregating. You also want to try to keep different shifts apart so people don't mix as much. So if you have an illness in one group of employees, it doesn't take down an entire workforce. So you might want to operate a factory or shop maybe 24 hours if you can, and break your teams into smaller groups and operate with smaller teams. So all of these things businesses should be thinking about. I've been talking to a number of folks who run businesses, large businesses, and they're starting to get these plans in place right now. But May's coming up, and I think a lot of the ability to protect consumers and workers is going to be on the part of what businesses do to try to protect their workforces.
Hey, Scott, the Journal just read an article about if you need to go to the grocery store, here's the things that you need to do. And that piece makes the point that most likely it's aerosolized virus from other people that you inhale that you need to worry about the most. You were just talking about leave the cafeteria open, then people don't have to go out and contact someone else. If you ingest something that has some of the virus on it, if it goes to your stomach, is that less of a problem than if you inhale aerosolize, something in the air that goes into your lungs?
Yeah, probably. I mean, this isn't an enteric virus. It's not. Transmission isn't through an oral route typically. Typically, this is from inhaling respiratory droplets or conjunctiva, touching a surface, touching your eyes, or getting respiratory droplets in your eyes. That seems to be how this is primarily spread. It's not really clear what the balance is between respiratory droplets and contaminated surfaces. I think when the final analysis is done, probably a lot of the spread is going to be through contaminated surfaces here. It is?
So you think that then? So you should wipe down anything. If you go to the supermarket and buy a bunch of stuff off the shelves where people have been, growing whatever, sneezing, coughing, whatever, if they don't have a mask, then you need to wipe anything you get at the supermarket. You need to wipe that down really well. But because you would touch it and then Go ahead.
I think the bigger risk here is things like subways or tables in restaurants that weren't adequately cleaned. Now people are paying more attention to those kinds of surfaces. Buying things is a risk, but it's very low risk. Now, I'm wiping things down where I can, but I think you can only do so much. I think the bigger risk here is shared surfaces in places where a lot of people frequent. Door handles, subways, things like that. That's why it's prudent to wash your hands. Be very conscious of not touching your face when you go out.
Hey, Scott, let me ask you, how realistic is it logistically to talk about doing tests at the workplace? I mean, are you going to have shifts where everybody shows up and you got to wait in line to get tested and then wait 15 minutes to get the results back, and that happens every day? It seems crazy.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen, but I think having access to testing from work is going to be very important. Making sure that, if you're a large employer, partnering with a local facility that can provide for testing. Maybe having in a large site, maybe having a van come for a certain number of hours a day or a certain number of days a week to provide testing to sort of the worried well. The people who have very mild symptoms might just have signs of a mild cold or might be worried that they were in touch with someone who was sick, and those kinds of people might not present to a doctor. They might not have the impetus to present to a doctor because they're not sick or they're very mildly ill. But it's probably prudent coming off an epidemic to get as many people tested as possible if we have the resources. And the only way to facilitate testing for those kinds of very mild marginal cases is to try to bring the testing into the work site. They're not going to present to a doctor, and I think we should be testing more broadly, at least initially, as we come away from this epidemic and as we go into the fall and try to prevent a new epidemic.